Why does Mass have to be in Latin? Well, technically it doesn't have to be in Latin, right? But the Catholic Church has treasured the idea of it being in Latin there's probably a couple different reasons. One, certainly because Latin is not evolving anymore. Even though new words are being added, the actual evolution of the words is not shifting and changing as opposed to like English. I mean, English words change and evolve all the time. And English is a terrible language to have in theology. Absolutely terrible, right? Because like pride, for instance, pride can mean 1,000 different things. Most languages have multiple words for pride, or same thing with love. We say we love, but we say we love chocolate chip cookies, and then we say we love our mother. You don't love those two things the same way at all. I mean, maybe some people do, but, right? Like, so once again, but in other languages, in Latin especially, there will be specific. Latin is very technical on a theological level. It's very specific. It's almost like it was created for theology. So for that reason, the Catholic Church has always treasured using Latin, even to this day. Like encyclicals are written in Latin because they're very technical, they're very specific. And the Catholic Church didn't want people to be able to say, oh, well, I am still using the same word. Yeah, but that word has changed its meaning over the years, right? It's like the word gay, right? I mean, gay used to mean happy. And now it means homosexual, right? So, which is vastly different, right? Those are vastly different meanings. And so the Catholic Church understood that these other languages can all evolve and change, and so we want to stop that. But another reason is to shroud the Mass in mystery. You should not understand. If you think you understand the Mass, then you haven't really gone to it, right? Mass is like the greatest form of art. It means you'll never understand it completely. And so the Church wants to immediately put you in an uncomfortable position. People always say like, oh yeah, I went to the Latin Mass and I didn't understand anything. I didn't like it. And it's like, yeah, that's why it's amazing. Right? It's like when you go in front of a great painting, or you go in front of a great film, or you go in front of like, a great, cantata of Bach or a symphony of Beethoven, and you sit there and you're like, I have no idea what's going on. Good, right? The fact that you're bored is a good sign. That means you don't actually understand it right away. Because take 2 minutes of self-reflection, or me. And if you understood that thing in 2 minutes, then it can't be that profound. Okay? There's a problem if we can digest something that quickly. So we are uncomfortable when we're placed in front of something that we don't understand because we're made of intelligence and will. And a human being's intelligence is there to understand and know. And as soon as we don't understand something, we don't like it, right? So when we come in front of the Mass, the Church specifically wanted souls to come into it and feel uneasy because I don't know what's going on. Good. Because when you go in, the most dangerous people on earth are the people who think they're so smart that they've got everything figured out. You can't talk to those kinds of people, right? You can't have a conversation. They come to the confessions all the time. And it's like they've already made up their minds of what is right and what isn't. And it's like, I can't help you. So the Catholic Church understands that I need to take the soul and put them in a vulnerable position immediately. So bring them into a Mass, into a worship, and they have no idea what's being said. Right? It's the best thing you could have. Because now it's like, okay, I don't understand the words. It's like if you can encounter someone who speaks a different language than you have to like decipher their smallest facial expressions and hand gestures, right? It's like, I'm trying to like look into your eyes, like, what are you telling me right now? You have to pay attention so much. You have to actually lean in to the uncomfortable nature of not being able to understand something. And that's when the Catholic Church has you. That's when a great work of art has you. When a great symphony has you, when a great painting has you. When Caravaggio puts before you a painting, you're like, what the heck is going on? I don't get this. It's like, all right, now you can do something. Because human beings can only make progress when they're in a position of vulnerability and being uncomfortable. If you believe that you've conquered the space that you're in, you can't advance anywhere else, right? You have nothing more to gain. I have it right now. Right? It's why Christ puts them in vulnerable positions. He makes them go up the mountain. God pulls the Jews into the desert, right? Christ makes St. Peter step outside of the boat and onto the land, right? He tells the apostles, cast out into the deep. It has to be putting you in a position where you're vulnerable and you're like, I need help. What's going on here? And so that's why the Latin is so special in the Mass, is to have Latin is because it immediately puts the soul in a position of, I have no idea what's going on. Good. Because guess what? When you go out for the next 6 days of your life and tragedy happens to you and your girlfriend dumps you and your parents are mad at you for something and this tragedy happens, and that thing in the Middle East happens, or wherever it might be, or this person gets run over by a car, and you're like, why would that happen? It's like, oh, guess what? You just spent like all day in worship where you didn't understand God. Makes sense, right? The problem is if you go into liturgy on Sunday and understand everything, then you expect that you should understand God in everything else and in everyone else. So then you leave the Mass, and then something happens, and you're like, why did that happen? Why did God do that? And priests come to you all the time. You're like, I don't know. Well, why don't you know? You're a priest. You should tell me why this happened. I can't tell you why that terrible thing happened to you. It's only God could. But human beings have created this culture where it's like, I have to understand everything. And this is toxic. This is the worst thing for us. It is the sin of Adam and Eve, right? I want to know everything. So yeah, that's why the Catholic Church uses Latin. And the lack of Latin immediately puts the soul in a position of, I understand this. And as soon as someone understands it, they'll check the box and move on to something else, right? It's like being a teacher, right? I teach high school students. I've been teaching high school boys for every year of my priesthood. And like being a high school student, the teacher that comes in and immediately you understand exactly who they are, right? They're kind of a little bit like, they're kind of a clown. They kind of just want to be your friend. They want you to understand them, right? You just don't respect them. You might like them, you might joke around with them, but when you're in a difficult position, or you're in a tragedy, or you're in a crisis in your life, you're gonna go to the teacher who was tough on you. You're gonna go to the teacher that had some distance from you, because that's the teacher you respect. Because people respect mystery. They don't understand it, they're uncomfortable, they don't always like it, but they respect it. And you come into the Mass that is in Latin, and you don't understand it, immediately you respect it. And I think one of the biggest problems with putting the Mass and worship into the vernacular is you don't have the same respect for it. I get it. I know everything about it. You don't have to tell me anything.
How does that interact with verses like Proverbs 16:16-17?
Yeah.
How much better is it to get wisdom than gold? And to get wisdom is to be chosen above silver. How beneficial is it to seek that understanding and to want to know more?
Yeah, you have to seek that, right? So, but the pathway into understanding the Mass is not primarily going to be through what the words are, but through what the essence and the actions themselves are. The sacrifice of it, right? The basic movements and motions of the Mass, which are understandable to everyone, right? It's the Mass is set up simply like basic human interaction, right? I first meet somebody, and what do? I communicate words to them, right? I try to exchange words with them, and those words are ideas. And if we both speak similar words and ideas, then we like each other, right? And then that develops a friendship, right? And the Mass is built the same way. So you can just look at the Mass on a basic level of actions, and you can come to a greater understanding of it, right? Just by watching what is happening, understanding what is happening, and not even knowing what words are being said necessarily. And then we can't forget the mystical aspect of it, that this is a work of Christ. So Christ is going to give you greater understanding, just like he gives you greater understanding of his ways, of the way he acts and works. So the primary way of understanding Christ and the mystery of God is not through books and through reading. The primary way is of submitting our will to him, because the submission of our will to God is the most prized thing that he can receive from us. And then he imparts to us wisdom. And that's like the classic story of St. John Vianney, when he saw this man who was going in and out of the church every day, and he's like, what are you doing all the time? He's just, what are you praying? And he's like, I'm not praying, I just look at Christ, and Christ looks back at me. And the love of God transmits a greater wisdom than the knowledge of God. That's why we say, like, in heaven, where the metric will be our love of God, not just our knowledge of God, right? Our love, the way that we've loved God, will give us a greater knowledge of God in heaven. So the understanding and the unlocking of the Mass, or the mysteries of God, will primarily be given by our submission to him, rather than by reading about him. Reading about him is good. Of course, we have to do that. But we can't forget that some of the greatest theologians could have also been the souls who loved God the least. But that simple soul, that peasant who in the 6th century has no understanding of Latin, but knows that when they go into Mass, they're putting themselves on the altar and offering everything that they have and everything that they are to Christ. And they're going to spend the rest of their day and the rest of their week offering once again, over and over again, that same sacrifice that they offered at Mass. That's the soul that will understand God the most. And the soul that opens up books and reads and tries to learn, they can understand a lot about who God is or what God is, but will they understand him on an intimate level? Not until they submit themselves. So, yeah, we do have to learn more. We have to seek that wisdom. But seek wisdom first and foremost by submitting our will. And that's the difficult thing, right? It's easy to open up a book. It's hard to, submit ourselves to the will of God when we don't want to.